So I read this book, Perfection by Vincenzo Latronico, recently, and it was shortlisted for the International Booker Prize and has been receiving a ton of praise. It's this short novella about a couple, Anne and Tom, who are South European expats who moved to Berlin as part of this sort of digital nomad international laptop class, and they live these sort of young urban professional yuppie lifestyles in the German capital during Angela Merkel's term as chancellor. And this book has received a ton of praise. It's been discussed in all the magazines, and it got the International Man Booker Prize shortlist. It's been receiving so much praise, and everyone's recommending it, and I'm kind of tired of seeing it everywhere because I read this, I was so excited to read it because it's a critique of this sort of yuppie digital nomad lifestyle, and it takes place in Berlin. So I thought it kind of combined two of my favorite things of the city I live in and shitting on a sort of cohort or cadre of people that I absolutely despise. One of which I am a part of, which is this sort of young urban professional lifestyle. So I want to talk about what I found wrong with this book. So some points about how we should feel about media that we assume that we should like because it makes good points. And then I want to talk about also books that that you should read instead. If you're interested in kind of what this book is talking about, whether it be critiques of yuppie lifestyle or books that take place in Berlin, I would like to recommend much better ways to spend your time than this fucking book. Let me first say, I'm gonna be shitting on this book a lot because I think this book sucks. But at the same time, Vincenzo Latronico is a profoundly better writer than I could ever be. He makes a living writing books as an author in a creative pursuit, so I have nothing but respect for him. And he's a better writer than I could ever be. I want to get that out of the way before I start hating. But yeah, this book sucks. I didn't like it. So just to get this quickly out of the way, when I'm talking about yuppies, I think this was a term that kind of was coined in the 80s. The movie St. Elmo's Fire, featuring some of these Brat Pack actors. I think St. Elmo's Fire and media that succeeded it, such as Seinfeld, Friends, really sort of put the idea of yuppies and the yuppie lifestyle into the broader cultural consciousness, which is these sort of young urban professionals in their 20s and 30s. They live in cities like New York or San Francisco or in this case Berlin. They are college educated, they have a college degree, and they all have jobs which kind of don't contribute anything meaningful to society, i.e. they do jobs on computers, basically, these sort of office type jobs, but they get really nice salaries, and then they kind of just live lives of, we live lives of going out to restaurants and going to bars and stuff like that, and gentrifying Brooklyn. It's like, finally, a book that takes place in Berlin and is critiquing this kind of lifestyle. Boy, was I disappointed. I wanted to just flip to a paragraph in this book. It's kind of just a random paragraph about this couple and their relationship to social media. I think it's kind of a good place to start when it comes to sort of the level of critique we're talking about here. Okay, this is from page 53 of Perfection. They weren't so into Twitter, even if it did sometimes make them laugh, but it was their main source of news from their country. An interest in home affairs had survived their move abroad, while they'd never taken any notice of German news, which was all in German. If they quit Twitter, they would only go back to refreshing newspaper and magazine homepages every hour, getting less personalized information and wasting even more time. Instagram was a showcase for their work, as well as being a constant source of new ideas and inspiration. Quitting Instagram was out of the question. There's a lot like that in the book. That kind of is how the whole book goes. It's sort of from this detached third-person perspective, talking about the couple in very sort of broad, general terms, and it all kind of reads like sort of old, out-of-touch man shaking his fist and complaining about, phone bad, social media bad, and it's like, these people's lives are empty and spiritually meaningless because of these things. And that's true to some extent, but at the same time, I think there's so much more that you can say about the emptiness and vacuousness of the yuppie lifestyle that cuts a little bit deeper than this. I mean, I felt like this was completely, totally saccharine and just didn't have the courage or guts to take any real risks. It kind of is 120 pages of they spent too much time on their phones and they're boring. And this book is so boring too. This book is also super boring. It was 120 pages and it felt exhausting to read. But yeah, there's so much more that you can say about the yuppie lifestyle that I think is a lot more cutting than something like they spend too much time on Instagram or whatever. Because at the core of it, at the core of this sort of yuppie lifestyle is you have a college degree, you have all the sort of benefits that your sort of inherited class privilege would offer you. You have started life at some advantage, whether it be having wealthy parents or you're kind of on a pipeline to good schools, and then you move to whatever, New York, Berlin, San Francisco, and with all that potential, with all that access to actually doing something meaningful, you are a management consultant, or you're a software engineer, or a UX designer, or you're a graphic designer, or whatever. All these jobs that I think fundamentally we understand at some level to be completely meaningless and of no tangible value or benefit to society. And something like that is, I think, a lot more interesting and a lot more real to what actually is the source of the whole and the heart of the people at the center of this novel, or anyone reading it that's interested in, oh, why do I feel like I'm living my dream in Brooklyn or Berlin, and but I feel like there's something missing. And this book is not gonna say anything novel or interesting about that. I think what this book is really good for is kind of like looking in the mirror and giving some of the most sort of easy, lightest critiques that you can kind of feel good about for catching, but it doesn't take those critiques any further to make you really challenge your sort of place in the cultural fabric that makes a city special. So another thing I wanted to say, this book is just dripping with self-seriousness that I find absolutely revolting. The prose is, on one hand, very sort of like boring and dry, but it takes itself so seriously, which I find gross. And if I'm being most charitable to the author, maybe that is sort of like maybe that is a critique in itself of how the yuppies take themselves so seriously. I highly doubt it, but I couldn't help but just wanting to barf all over the place while reading this, because it takes itself so seriously. And I think that's one of the things that also at the heart of some of the most agonizing things about yuppie culture is how they or we take ourselves so seriously. It's like you're a management consultant or you're a software engineer. You're constantly sort of doing this like self-mythologizing and sort of personal myth making and thinking about your personal narrative through life and kind of spending all of your 20s like, I have to figure myself out and stuff. And that's okay. Like we all figure ourselves out through our 20s, but there is something that's just like kind of sickening with the way that people just who have coasted. I'm not absolving myself either, but people who have just kind of been lucky enough to inherit quite a bit of class privilege and then have coasted through life and then end up in a city and still kind of have the audacity to sort of still put themselves up on a pedestal and take themselves so seriously. It's really, really kind of annoying and gross. And once again, this book is great if you're looking for just kind of like oh, this is so cool. It takes place in my home city. And, Kollwitz-Kiez was mentioned, or the Stadtbezirk of Neukölln was mentioned, or, my favorite parks are mentioned. Sure, I guess. Like, that's not why you read a book, though. And then the same thing with the cultural commentary is it's so, like, least common denominator. It's like, nobody will disagree with this book. It's kind of like how there's a million movies and TV shows out right now that are making fun of the most easy punching bags of all time, like the richest people at the top of society, like Succession or White Lotus, which were good shows or whatever. Succession or White Lotus or all these other movies that are about like, our feudal tech overlords that are making our lives worse, and they're the most pathetic losers at the same time. All this stuff is true, but like, I don't know, that at some point stops being interesting when it's just making fun of the most easy to make fun of people of all time. And that's a little bit of this book. These characters are really, really easy punching bags, but it doesn't really say anything interesting. It's kind of just exactly what you expect. They spend too much time on their phones. There's, they just kind of feel a little disconnected from the life of the city that they're a part of, but it doesn't go any further at all. So 2 thumbs down. Stop recommending it to people. Try it out, I guess. It's 120 pages. You'll have an underwhelming 2 hours reading this. But anyway, I want to move on from this fucking book and recommend some books that would be much that I think go after this sort of lifestyle in a much more interesting ways. And I'll recommend some books that take place in Berlin. If you're interested in reading more about Berlin, much better. For my friends that live in Berlin that are watching this, or if somehow you clicked on this video and you live in Berlin or you're interested in Berlin, or I'll talk about some better books to read. Moving on, American Psycho, which I read earlier this year for the first time. That's a pretty easy pick. It's Bret Easton Ellis is obviously taking the critique so much further. The same urges, the same chemicals in your brain that are being triggered when you are comparing, I don't know, how swanky your apartment is compared to one of your coworkers. I think Bret Easton Ellis is kind of implying it's the same chemicals in your brain that are being triggered when you are murdering a person in cold blood and watching the life drain from their eyes. I think that's kind of an insane concept, but I really, really like it and I really enjoy it. That's a book that obviously takes so much more risks, for better or worse. It's a tough and grisly book to get through, but far more interesting, and I think says so much more, has so much more to say about the lifestyle that's being talked about in Vincenzo Latronico's Perfection. A book that was written before the idea of the yuppie was even ever conceived, but I think has so much to say about the yuppie lifestyle is Kurt Vonnegut's Breakfast of Champions, about a character named Dwayne Hoover. At the root of it is Dwayne Hoover becomes obsessed that he's the only person capable of free will. Here was the core of the bad ideas which Trout gave to Dwayne. Everyone on Earth was a robot with one exception, Dwayne Hoover. Of all the creatures in the universe, only Dwayne was thinking and feeling and worrying and planning and so on. Nobody else knew what pain was. Nobody else had any choices to make. Everybody else was a fully automatic machine whose purpose was to stimulate Dwayne. Dwayne was a new type of creature being tested by the creator of the universe. Only Dwayne Hoover had free will. I don't know. Let me know. Let me know if I'm reaching a little too far. But I think some of the core ideas presented in this book of this guy, Dwayne Hoover, who's financially successful, becoming convinced that everyone else in the world's only purpose is to stimulate him, and he is the only one capable of free will. I could say one could draw a squiggly line from this kind of thinking to, I don't know, someone who followed their dreams and moved to the big city and got the big boy job and they're making a lot of money, and talking about people who still live back home and are building families, having kids, and they didn't move out of their hometown. I think there's something to be said about some of this commentary. And again, all the ideas presented in Breakfast of Champions, I think, say so much more about the yuppie lifestyle without even trying to than a book, Perfection, which is absolutely on its face marketed as this is the yuppie book. Something like Breakfast of Champions does it in a much more interesting and creative way, and in a much less self-serious way. This is a hilarious book that doesn't take itself seriously whatsoever. In fact, it kind of sticks its nose up and laughs in the face of anything that takes itself seriously, which I love. I think that's the only justifiable lens through which to see some of these ideas or present some of these ideas from a more humoristic perspective. So I love this book. Kurt Vonnegut's one of my favorite authors, and even just kind of thinking about what to talk about in this video and thinking about Breakfast of Champions made me so excited to reread it. Probably one of the next few books that I'll reread. So this is one of my favorite Vonnegut books. It's awesome, and read this instead of Perfection. And let me know. Am I cooking? Does this make sense? Or is this is this, am I just full of hot air? I don't know. Something else about Breakfast of Champions that I kind of just remembered. It's obviously one of his more cutting critiques of American imperialism and kind of how America treats its racial underclasses and minorities at the sort of altar of accumulating more capital as a society. And I think you can extrapolate those ideas into, on an individual perspective, the yuppie itself, and sort of they or we have sacrificed ourselves at the altar of accumulating capital, and we have completely lost sight of the things that actually kind of matter. So anyway, fantastic book. Berlin, Alexanderplatz. This is a classic. I read it in English. It's written by Alfred Doblin, and it takes place in Berlin in the 1910s. And it's kind of this picaresque novel about this man named Franz Bieberkopf, who's released from prison, and he kind of just descends on Berlin in sort of the way a kind of a monster would. It's He's definitely a sort of a guy doing bad things, but it's an awesome, awesome, whimsical portrayal of Berlin in a really interesting time in its history. So this is a fantastic book. It's obviously a classic. So read this before you read something else about Berlin. This is an awesome book. In my opinion, the best book that takes place in Berlin, the best book that I've mentioned in any video ever, probably, is Slumberland by Paul Beatty. He is probably my favorite author of all time, and this is his novel that takes place in Berlin. I can just read the back. DJ Darky, an expat mixmaster with a phonographic memory, has made the perfect beat. All he needs is someone to play over it. But not just anyone. Charles Stone, aka The Schwa, an experimental jazzman who happens to have disappeared without a trace. DJ Darky's search for his artistic and spiritual other half will lead him through the streets of newly reunified Berlin, a deranged funhouse of race, sex, love, and history. Lucid, bombastic, and wildly funny, Paul Beatty's Slumberland is a provocative classic that hums with life. So yeah, check it out. I love Paul Beatty. I will probably talk about him in a video in the future too, more at length. He's awesome. Some other Berlin books just off the top of my head. Something I'm looking forward to reading is Hans Fallada. I've never read him before actually, but I'm looking forward to it. So maybe check those out too. Goodbye to Berlin by Christoper Isherwood. That takes place in this sort of theaters where people are dancing and stuff in 1930s Berlin. But cabaret. It's talking about Berlin during its sort of like cabaret club scene in the 30s, and then history is kind of knocking at the door the whole novel. At the beginning, it's a more fun book that's more lighthearted. It almost has kind of like a Holly Golightly Breakfast at Tiffany's vibe. Like there's a female character in the book who's very much like a Holly Golightly type, and then as it proceeds later on into the book, the Nazi Party in Germany is taking power and really, really dark shit is happening in Berlin, and it's kind of like people are enjoying their lives, they're going to cabaret clubs, they're Holly Golightlying all over the place, and at the same time, history is knocking at the door. That's an awesome book. Again, any of these books that I mentioned are much better than Reading Perfection. Yo, I don't know what else to say. Check it out. Like, if anybody wants to read it, hit me up. I'm not saying like never read this book or anything. You might read it and like it. Let me know if you've already read this book and you liked it. Let me know in the comments what you liked about it. Tell me if I'm completely off base. If you want to read this, I got a copy that I don't want to look at anymore. So hit me up. I'll send this copy to someone if you let me know in the comments that you want to read this copy. It's not a terrible book. Obviously, some people who know more about writing and books than I do shortlisted it for the International Man Booker Prize, but yeah, I hated it, so I don't want it in my apartment anymore. Hit me up if you want this copy. Yeah, thanks for watching this video. Have a good one.